Well, welcome to Cloud Next and to the Startup Forum. I'm Thomas Kurian. I run Google's cloud organization. Several years ago, when Google started our cloud journey, we felt that a big part of the value of cloud was making technology accessible to everybody. And when we said everybody, including companies that were just being founded as a vehicle to help them have the same technology that powers Google to run their own businesses. Something that most people don't realize is when Google started as a company and Larry and Sergey wrote the search engine, it took them a certain amount of time to write the search engine, and it took them a lot longer time to actually build the infrastructure to scale it, because in those days there was no cloud. And so as a way to help the next Larry or Sergey who is trying to create a company, we wanted to take all the infrastructure that powers Google and our services, the same infrastructure that powers search and ads and all of these things, to bring it to people who are founding companies. Along with that, we also felt that AI was now the new reason why companies were being formed. And there were many companies being formed around new models, new tools to use AI at scale. So we made our technology available to companies to startups who are being founded around AI. And we not only help them build models, but also reach developers through our platform. And when I say reach developers, we put them in our Vertex platform, which is our platform that enterprises are using to build AI applications, and made their models reachable to developers, and understood from the use that developers are doing with the models, what new capabilities to add to Vertex, to surround models, make them more secure, ensure that data is protected, to connect models to existing systems, to do things like RAG, to tune models, to optimize it. One of the partners that's been with us for a very long time on this journey is Anthropic. Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei worked with us for many years now, and we worked on 3 different dimensions. One is we have a shared belief in common things around security of models, helpfulness of models, interpretability of models, making models easier to understand, et cetera. So we have a number of things around policies and how models should work that our organizations share, Google and Anthropic. We also have worked to improve Vertex and make Vertex support Claude, the new set of models from Anthropic, including, as you know, we announced 2 of them available, and the other one is coming in the next couple of weeks. So we're working actively on making all of Anthropic's models available to everybody. 2 of them are now generally available, 3rd coming within the next few weeks. And then 3rd, we've also improved, working with Anthropic, many things around our inferencing training infrastructure to make the quality of that really work well. One of the things we have been working on is something called multi-host, for example, and it's super important in order to serve the Claude models well. So that's a very deep engineering partnership. Elad Gil needs no introduction. He's a superstar in the investment community and has built and run a number of startups himself. And what we wanted to do was now welcome both Elad and Dario to come and spend some time talking about what they see in the market, how they see their organizations evolving, and to take questions from all of you as well. So I wanted to welcome them both. Elad, Dario, welcome. You guys indeed don't introductions, so rather than me moderate, we thought the 2 of you could have a conversation and also take questions from the audience. So thanks so much for doing this, and enjoy the time.
Oh, thanks so much for including us, and a huge thanks to TK and Google for having us here today. It's been a very exciting event to date. We thought it'd be really fun to talk about some of the things that have been happening in the world of Claude and Anthropic, and then a little bit about AI more generally, both in terms of societal implications, but also some of the very exciting technologies that we see coming. So first off, congratulations on the launch of Claude 3 and the Claude family of models. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you've done recently and some of the implications?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you for having me, Elad, and TK. Claude 3, was our latest update to our models that was released about 5 weeks ago. And I wanted to highlight two things about Claude 3. So I think one thing that we worked particularly hard on was the personality of the model. We've had this kind of chat paradigm of models for a while, but I think one thing that hasn't devoted as much attention as the kind of reasoning capabilities of the model, the ability of the models to answer questions, is just how engaging the model is, how much it sounds like a human, how warm and natural it is to talk to. So we had an entire team while we were developing Claude 3 that was devoted to making sure that the model is engaging, and people noticed that as soon as we released it, and that's the case across the Claude 3 family of models. And the second thing is the family of models, where we made 3 different models. Opus is the largest one, Sonnet is the smaller one, but it's faster and cheaper, and Haiku is very fast and very cheap, but very strong in intelligence for how fast and cheap it is. And one of the pieces of feedback that we got from customers is that there are different needs that an enterprise might face, right? Opus is very good at performing very difficult tasks where you have to do exact calculations, and those calculations have to be accurate. So you prize reliability and accuracy above all else, or applications that are not sensitive to latency. Sonnet is sort of a workhorse model. It's a little bit in the middle. For many applications, it's as good as Opus, and competitive with models like GPT-4 Turbo. But it's much cheaper and relatively faster. Haiku, in many ways, I'm very excited about because it outperforms almost all models of its intelligence class, while being very fast and very cheap.
I guess to the fast and cheap point, if you look at the history of the semiconductor industry, Moore's law was coined in the 70s to basically talk about the rate of doubling of transistors, and you could extrapolate that curve and say, okay, how quickly will we see enormous changes in compute and price performance relative to semiconductors? I've heard you say really interesting things that I feel are related about price versus performance for both training and inference. Can you tell people a little bit more about that?
Yes. So I think for both training and inference, we have a few different patterns, right? So one pattern is that the folks training these models, including Anthropic, are typically spending 5x as much per year on the models. But there are 2 other trends that are happening as well. One is that the price performance per flop for training, I think same thing will be true for inference, it's dropping at probably 1.5 to 2x a year. It varies with the estimates. And then algorithmically, we're developing new ways to train the models that are also falling at 1.5x or 2x per year. So I think the cost of training a particular model is going to go down very drastically. But the models are so economically valuable that the amount of money that's spent on training is going to continue going exponentially upward, and will eat up all the efficiency gains, at least at the higher end of models. So the whole just the whole thing has so much momentum behind it that costs can be going down and yet spending is going up.
That's pretty impressive. So that basically means if it's a 1.5 to 2x decrease in cost and you're spending 5x more, then it's effectively 7.5 to 10 times more compute a year is effectively...
Yeah, we within Anthropic, we tend to measure things in units of, we call it actually effective compute. And yeah, I think that is going up by 10x per year. Obviously, an exponential that steep can't last forever, and no one knows for sure how long it'll last, but that's where we are right now.
Given that each step function and scale seems to have a really big shift in capabilities as well, how do you envision LLMs evolving in the near future, and what do you view as the capability set that's coming in the next year or two?
Yeah, so a few things. One is, I think, intelligence coming from pure scale. So the models today, even Claude 3 Opus, which on many measures is the strongest model in the world, if you ask it graduate school biochemistry questions or very difficult coding questions or, to make a whole software application. It's not quite at the level where it can do that reliably. It's better than any previously released model, but that's still very challenging. And so I think those very specialized tasks and kind of high reliability will come from further scale, and further scale will come, not just for us, but certainly for us in the next year or two. I think the second thing is multimodality. So with Claude 3, we introduced image inputs, but I think we're also going to see we're going to see video inputs, we're going to see audio inputs, we're going to see interaction with the physical world, maybe even with robotics. The third thing I would say is work to reduce hallucinations. Even if models are reliable most of the time, hallucinations block a lot of enterprise use cases. And so we're working very hard, we have very substantial teams to try and reduce the amount of hallucination that's present in models. And then the final thing I expect to see in the next year or two is agents, models acting in the world. We've seen lots of instantiations of agents so far, but I don't think we've seen anything that's really, really strong. And I think getting something that's really, really strong will need additional scale and then techniques on top of that.
I guess with each step up in capabilities, you see new market segments kind of open up. So for example, my sense is something like Harvey, which is a vertical legal AI company, couldn't really exist until this most recent generation of models, just in terms of the capabilities. And it seems with each step function in models, there's new things that open up. What are the enterprise use cases that you're seeing that are becoming increasingly common on Claude 3 and the family of models more generally?
Yeah, so there's a large number, but I'll just list a few of them. So one of them is coding. So as the models get smarter and trained for longer, they get much better at coding tasks. So for example, one of our customers that we're working with on GCP is GitLab. And so I think we'll see increasing amounts of models being able to bite off and do larger amounts of coding tasks over the next year or two. I think another use case has been healthcare and biomedicine. Again, this thing about needing to know the knowledge, needing to get it right. Use cases like financial and legal. Again, these often involve reading long documents, which Claude 3 has gotten better at relative to previous models, and making sure that your analysis of them is correct. And then finally, I think in terms of consumer internet and consumer applications, big user has been, for example, Quora and people are doing more and more sophisticated things with these products built upon our APIs.
When I've spoken to large enterprises who are adopting AI, it seems that they're kind of segmenting what they're going to do into three buckets. We're going to have a vendor that we're going to use to do something for us. It increases operations efficiency or other things. We're going to build internal tools, and then we're going to do stuff in our product. What proportion of usage do you think roughly falls against each three of those in terms of how people are thinking about using Claude?
I think it's actually split pretty evenly. Use cases deploy at different speeds, but I hear people regularly talk about all three of them. The idea of making internal tools to make internal employees more productive. The idea of doing something customer-facing, those are both very common. One thing I will say is across those use cases, the type of model that people use is not evenly split. If you're doing something customer-facing, you're more likely to use the smaller models like Sonnet or Haiku. If you're doing something internal, where the point is to get the analysis, and it doesn't matter whether it takes the model 10 seconds or 20 seconds to generate it, you're more likely to use the larger models. And the scale is also smaller, so the cost of the larger models is less of an issue.
I guess if you look at the moment in time of this trend of technology adoption for AI, the starting gun was probably about 18 months ago. There was a series of models that came out. There were chat-based things that came out. How do you think about what's going to either facilitate or some obstacles in terms of enterprise adoption of AI going forward, given how early it is? I guess many enterprises are still just planning what to do. And you're seeing a lot of early adopters. What do you view as the primary obstacles to that and similarly accelerants?
Yeah, I mean, one way I think about it is that we are always still trying to figure out how our own models work. A large language model is this very complicated object. When we deploy it, there's no way for us to figure out everything that it's capable of ahead of time. Some of that just has to be learned from customers. We try the test. And so, I think one of the biggest barriers is just our knowledge is imperfect and transmitting that imperfect knowledge as we learn it to customers. I would say that one of the most important things we do is just providing good prompt engineering support. It sounds simple, but 30 minutes with a prompt engineer can often make an application work when it wasn't before, or get better at handling errors much better than it was before. I just think the difference that can make is huge, and different models are prompted in different ways. So the first thing I always recommend to an enterprise customer is just meet with one of our prompt engineers for half an hour. It might transform it might completely transform your use case. I think the other thing is, there's a big difference between demos and actual deployment, right? You demo the model, it seems like it does the right thing. You put the model in production, it's like, well, it does the right thing 90% of the time. 10% of the time, it doesn't do the right thing. How do I handle that? Am I misinforming a customer? Am I misinforming an employee? Is it doing something that has to be cleaned up or handled via the infrastructure around it? So helping companies to build the infrastructure around it. And GCP has been very involved in this, and it's an important part of what they're doing with Vertex and Vertex Model Garden. Things like trust and safety support, moderation endpoints, data loss prevention. I think all this infrastructure around is going to be very important. People got very excited about the language models, rightly so. But to actually deploy something in production and scale it and make it work economically, you need the infrastructure to handle all of these things around it.
I guess that really fits well with Anthropic's starting point, because I feel like you have very deep roots in the AI safety and alignment community. And how do you think about what are the ways to optimize for safety and reliability in the context of these models in the enterprise? Are there specific areas you're most focused on tackling? And what are some of the models you've used to approach it so far?
Yeah, so I think that takes us all the way back to the very first paper that Anthropic published. And there we kind of laid out a goal for what a conversational agent or an API, just any kind of agent that you interact with for business use, what properties should it have? And what we hit on was helpful, honest, and harmless. If you think about it, it's kind of what you would want from someone you're working with, right? You want them to help you. You definitely don't want them to lie to you. You want them to be honest. You want them, not to cause harm. And so we've put a lot of effort into all of that from the beginning. We have a whole team working on reducing model hallucinations. There have been various studies, for example, of folks trying to jailbreak models, right? Trying to get them to go around their guardrails, sometimes to reveal sensitive private information. And in most of those academic studies, Anthropic models are much harder to jailbreak than all the other models in the world. Differences have been things like 30 to 90% for other models, 0 to 6% for Anthropic models.
Do you think those sorts of security style features will be built directly into the models, or do you think there'll be third-party providers or clouds that will provide those sorts of solutions?
Yeah, so I think it's a combination of those things, and that's one of the reasons for our partnership with GCP, right? It's just like whenever you have a security problem, you can be attacked at different levels. And if you want to provide a secure solution, you have to account for all those levels. And so at the model level, things like jailbreaking, things like helpful, honest, harmless, of course, are very important enterprise use cases. We want the models to be predictable, and we believe we can provide that very well. But all of that isn't of any use if the model gets stolen out from under you, right? The model itself gets stolen out from under you. And so security on the cloud is very important. Privacy on the cloud is very important. And TK could speak to that much more extensively and eloquently than I could, but this is a priority for GCP. So I think of our partnership as a way to provide these features, these different levels of features for enterprises and cover all of the bases.
Given your how much you've thought about safety, what do you view as the biggest risks that keep you awake at night regarding AI safety or AI models or systems?
Yeah, so I think I'd separate that out into kind of short term and longer term. So short term, I think a lot of the things are the very practical things that we've already been talking about today. So that includes things like models that are misleading, models that might be biased if they start to make important decisions related to credit or financial decisions, legal analysis, insurance. These are not areas where it's good to make a mistake or to be biased. And so we work very hard. We've put out blog posts in this area, and each generation of our models has been better at this task than previous ones. We've gotten better at analyzing financial documents, making sure that the analysis is accurate. And we've put, independent folks have put out studies, and we do very well, often the best model in the world on those studies. So that's what I worry about in the short run, and is of concern to enterprises every day. Customers ask about this question, right? It doesn't have to come from us. I think in the long run, I worry about bigger stuff as we go on this exponential of models. They're going to become increasingly powerful and increasingly autonomous. And I think it's going to be possible for folks to misuse models and use those models to reconnoiter abilities that they would not have been able to have otherwise. I worry about misuse of biology. I worry about cyber attacks. And we have something called a responsible scaling plan that's designed to detect those threats, which honestly are not really very present today. We're only starting to see the beginning of them. So every time we release a new model, we run them through this set of evaluations, this set of tests to see, hey, are we getting any closer to the world where we would be worried about these risks being present in models? And so far the answer has always been no, but they're a little bit better at these tasks than they were before. And someday the answer will be yes, and then we have a prescribed set of safety procedures that we'll take on the model when that is the case. The other side of the risks is, as models become more autonomous, we worry about what they do that might not be in line with what we want them to do, right? A chatbot, or even most of the enterprise applications, they can do unpredictable things, but at the end of the day, it's just words, or it's mostly just words. As models start to become agents, as they go out in the physical world, as they take actions on computers and phones and interfaces autonomously and without humans overseeing them, I think there will be very substantial risks in this area, and we'll have to have policies. We'll have to mitigate them. I think 2 or 3 years from now, enterprises will be asking me and other model developers that question, just like they're asking us about data privacy and data security and hallucinations today.
Yeah, it feels almost like a natural evolution of different security-related issues. And if you look at what humans do and how they act nefariously, we already have a lot of examples of where people don't act well, and so we could just extrapolate some of that behavior. What are you excited about from the perspective of AI? It definitely feels like, at a minimum, it's one of the biggest potential changes for global health, global education equity. What are areas that excite you in terms of our future?
Yeah. So a few things on this. One, I used to be a biologist. I did my PhD in computational neuroscience, and I worked in computational proteomics at Stanford Medical School. And one of the actual reasons that I left that field to go into AI is I felt that the complexity of what we needed to handle was really ballooning. If you think about the history of biology and medicine over the last 100 years, the diseases that we've been able to cure or at least address are relatively simple, right? If you think about viral diseases, it means there's an invader in your body, and you need to find a way to repel that invader without harming the human itself. If we look at cancer or Alzheimer's or the aging process itself, those are fundamentally more complex problems, and humans are limited in the ability to keep detail about them in our head, right? There are whole departments where, if you think about like immunology, right? The immune system is incredibly complicated. And one hope I have is that, look, humans have some strengths and they have some weaknesses. And biology is starting to get to the point where making progress on it is difficult because of some weaknesses of humans. AI systems have some strengths and some weaknesses. As they scale, those strengths increase. Some of those weaknesses will be addressed. Some will remain. And I'm hoping that by working together, we can accelerate progress in these areas. If we look at cancer now, right? It's kind of considered a miracle. If we take one really narrow subtype of one type of cancer, miracle drugs are considered drugs that that will cure half or 2/3 of the people in that very narrow subtype. It would be great if, in the next 10 years, with the help of AI, we could take these giant swaths of diseases and say, you know what, prognosis for this is no longer you're very likely to die. It's we cure 90% of the people of this entire type.
What role does Anthropic hope to play in this future? Because it seems like there's a few different approaches. There's the core LLMs that you've built. There's things that can be post-trained or fine-tuned relative to those core LLMs into different verticals and vertical applications, finance and legal and things like that. There's potentially different model architectures for biology, physics, chemistry, et cetera, things like robotics. I'm just sort of curious, like, where in that spectrum you hope to play a role.
Yeah, so I think we actually plan to be in most of the positions in that spectrum. I mean, one thing, you never know anything for sure, right? Companies are unpredictable, but it's our current hypothesis that we intend to be more enterprise-focused than consumer-focused, and that's the reason for our partnership with GCP. But within that, there's a huge amount of different areas you can work in. So my view is, look, I think there's a little bit of a false dichotomy between large models that are general purpose and small models that are trained in some particular area, like biology or finance or coding. I think we see a little bit of that divergence today because we Anthropic spend all our time training the general models, and then folks can take small models and specialize them. But that's already changing. That's already starting to go away, right? We're already working on, how can we modify, how can we make custom models? Anthropic has already made custom models. I think the thing that will ultimately win in a given domain, it isn't the small custom model or the large general model, it's a large customized model. I think of customization as providing a general uplift, but not changing the basic scaling trend of models. And so, I totally believe that, models that are, models that are customized for biology will be very important in solving that. Models that are customized for finance will be very important for solving that. It's just that the customization will have to keep up with the model scaling. And Anthropic is very excited to work with customers to provide such models.
So do you think, for example, if you look at something like protein folding where you're well-versed, is that just something that would be based on a transformer model that's like a LLM, and then you just add some biology-related information, or you just train a large-scale model specifically with sort of molecular information associated?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one, right? Because the state of the art there is AlphaFold, and I think AlphaFold actually had a big impression on me. I think Google DeepMind's work there has been very inspiring. But we need 100 things like that. And I think we're both going to continue to have, when we think of small specialized systems, less small language models, but like systems that are very targeted at solving a particular computational problem. That will continue to happen. That will coexist with large models that are both general and customized. I do hope, though, we'll get to this holy grail where the large language models can act as co-workers to help us design the next AlphaFold and the next 100 AlphaFolds. I think that's the ultimate holy grail.
That's really cool. I guess related to that, there's a lot that you mentioned in terms of agents and systems that will go and do actions on behalf of the user. What do you think is needed besides the core LLM in order to achieve performant agents?
Yeah. First, I would say no one really knows the answer to that question, right? It's kind of an unexplored frontier, but we can make some guesses. One of my guesses is that if you want an agent to act in the world, usually that acting requires you to engage in a series of actions, right? You talk to a chatbot, it only answers, and maybe there's a little follow-up. But with agents, you might need to take a bunch of actions, see what happens in the world or with a human, and then take more actions. And so you need to do a long sequence of things. And for that long sequence of things to actually work, the error rate on each of the individual things has to be pretty low, right? If I'm a robot and I'm like, okay, I'm going to pick up this thing and walk over there, and then I'm going to pick up that, I'm building the house or something, there's probably thousands of actions that go into that. And so all of this is to say the models need to get more reliable because the individual steps need to have very low error rates. And I think part of that will come from scale. We need another generation or two of scale before the agents will really work. I think another part of that will come from these reliability techniques that Anthropic has specialized in, right? We think of them as, safety or reliability techniques, but I think they're actually enablers to enable these longer horizon tasks. So those are a couple of things I would point to.
When I look at agents that I think are doing interesting things today, Cognition may be example, Magic, there's a few in the coding space. A lot of them are basically using human in the loop to help steer something. So an agent is almost like a junior employee or intern who's coming back and asking you for help. How important do you think human in the loop will be for some of these more advanced systems versus it's just all going to be automated?
Yeah, I think that's an unanswered question. It's one of these things, I kind of divide questions into pure technical and questions that involve interaction with humans either at the user experience level or at the societal level. Those second types of questions are like really hard to predict. They're really empirical. You just have to kind of try it and figure it out. And so I think this is a big unanswered question with agents, right? I have this agent that in theory could do a bunch of stuff for me or for my business. Do I want to just let it do those things or do I want to intervene? At what points do I intervene? Obviously, pure automation is appealing from a bunch of, for a bunch of perspectives because I can just assign an agent to do something. But if I think about, for example, agents controlling computers, do I really want an agent rifling around on my machine, my operating system for an hour, and I have no idea what it did, and it's like, okay, done with the task. And I'm like, well, what else did you do? I have no way of knowing. So again, I think there's kind of like a human or UX problem there, which is what can you trust the agent to do? There's also a safety problem, like what guardrails? How do I know this thing didn't introduce a security vulnerability intentionally or by accident? And so these are all unanswered questions. Again, some of them are going to be about the infrastructure around the system, right? The agent operates within a cloud, and so its abilities are going to be limited within a cloud. And so I think that takes us back to like why Anthropic has cloud partners, and the idea that there's a model layer and that there's there's an infrastructure layer, and we're excited to work with GCP on the infrastructure layer.
I guess related to that, as you mentioned, you've done a lot of work with Claude 3 on the reinforcement learning side, and really making sure that some of the models interact in a really rich and human way. Can you tell us a little bit more about your thoughts on reinforcement learning more generally and how it applies to different enterprise use cases?
Yeah. So, a little bit about, kind of engineering of Claude 3. I mean, about a year and a half ago, Anthropic developed this method called constitutional AI, which is the idea that you can give the AI a set of principles and then kind of train it to evaluate itself on how well it's following that set of principles. The language model can read text, so it can read a constitution or a set of principles and use that as a North Star to loop in its own training. So we use that as well as RL from human feedback, as well as RL from things like executing code. And we find that you kind of get the best results when you throw all these things together, right? I think this is a recurring observation in the AI and LLM space, which is that you might think you have some complicated way of combining things, but actually you just throw a bunch of stuff together, and if you throw enough stuff together with enough diversity, the model starts to catch on to the pattern. So I think the future, while it'll be incredibly difficult to find all these sources of training, I don't expect it to be fundamentally different. I just expect it to have a different scale, new tasks to do, maybe some algorithmic innovation here and there.
One customer story that you told me about before that I thought was really interesting and has a lot of implications in terms of how we think about future access to information was Liquid Tech. Could you talk a little bit more about that partnership and what you're doing?
Yes. So Liquid Tech is a mobile network provider to a lot of Africa and the Middle East. So we're working with them and potentially with GCP to start to provide Claude in these areas. And we have some. We're also looking into additional partnerships to help with ministries of education. So I think one thing that's really important is providing this technology to all of the world, right? Something that tends to happen by default. I'm not really blaming anyone for it, but it's just kind of the natural thing that tends to happen is that when you make a new technology, it's always distributed first to those who are already most familiar with that technology and prior technologies, right? When we do go to market, the first people usually who deploy our models are startups. then it's larger companies who are digital natives, then it's folks who are in other industries who are a little further from it, and then outside all of those circles is sometimes other parts of the world that aren't as immediately exposed to these technologies. And I think it's important from a humanitarian perspective that we develop these technologies here and kind of distribute them everywhere. And I think it's good from a business perspective too.
What you mentioned in terms of education access really resonates. I think a lot of us in what I'd call like the nerd community have at one point or another read The Diamond Age, which is a book about adoption of AI for educational purposes and things like that. Do you think we're going to see a leapfrogging of AI agents or AI tutors into regions outside of the Western world relative to what's happened today? Yeah,
I mean, I often cite that book. In it, the conceit is you can build all kinds of things with nanotechnology, and so this engineer makes something called the Young Ladies Illustrated Primer, which is basically, today we would call it like an AI system that interacts with you and is able to give you a complete automated education. So I don't know. I think there's lots of potential for that, both in the developed world and in the developing world. I think that's a very promising area. We often struggle to provide education to all of those who need it. As with all things, we don't know what will work and what won't work ahead of time. So I think there will need to be a lot of experiments in those areas, and we're excited to conduct those experiments.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of papers from the 80s that basically show that if you have really good one-on-one tutoring, you end up in some cases performing a standard deviation better on whatever that thing is that you're being tutored on. And so it seems like there's enormous promise there. Are there other things that Anthropic is doing in the education vertical today?
I think that's the main one we're thinking about. I think general use of these models, both from a consumer perspective and from an enterprise perspective, I think the models can be used to help. I mean, obviously they can be misused, right? People can use them to cheat on homework or whatever. But I think if used responsibly, they can help provide information. They can help be an aid. And I totally agree with your point. And it's intuitive, right? It's much more difficult to engage with a teacher in a classroom of some number of dozens than it is to directly talk to someone who's instructing you. It just makes sense that humans connect one-on-one.
A lot of Anthropic's focus has been on enterprise and enterprise partnerships, but you've mentioned consumer a few times. Can you talk about how you engage with different consumer partners?
Yes, I mean, one of our theses is that models are general, right? So if a model is good for enterprise, then generally, consumers should be able to use it as well, particularly consumers that, want to use it to be productive, to read documents, to perform coding, to do other things like this. And so, we find that whenever we produce a strong model, that it has both enterprise use cases and consumer use cases. Now, in terms of our effort and our thinking about how we build the company, we're more focused on the enterprise side. But again, having built a strong model, it's kind of you almost feel like the model is bursting at the seams to get out to every possible surface you could deploy it to.
Some of the areas from a model development company perspective that seem to come up a few times in terms of creating new capabilities is one reasoning, which you mentioned is in part due to scale and training of models, but in part, I know some people are starting to work on standalone reasoning modules, and then second is memory. How do you think about those areas and their applications going forward, and how much time are you spending thinking about those things?
Sorry, the question is reasoning modules and memory?
Correct.
So I think memory can come from a bunch of different places. So Anthropic has been a pioneer in extending the context window. We were the first one to provide a context window of 100,000 tokens back when no other model had a context above 8,000 tokens. Now we're up to 2,000 tokens. We're looking at a million. Other model providers are doing the same. So that's one source of memory. Another source of memory is RAG, retrieval augmented generation, where you can take some large database that might have 1 million documents in it and use a small model to pick out from that database the things that are most relevant and then stuff them into the model's context window. So I think those are two areas around memory where we're making a lot of progress. Reasoning, I've kind of observed this general phenomenon in AI systems where there are words like reasoning where ahead of time everyone thinks they know what they mean, right? It's like, oh yeah, this is reasoning and that's rote memorization. But one thing I think that AI continually teaches us and is continuing to teach us is that a lot of time concepts that we think are binary and crisp are actually continuous and diffuse. And so my view is as we scale these models, they get better and better at reasoning. They're still not all that good at reasoning. I think, it would be the intellectually honest statement. But every time we scale a model, they get a little better at it. They get better at coding. They get better at doing math. I don't think reasoning is some binary thing that is absent from our models and needs some genius innovation in order to be present. I think it's something that, improves with the exponential and happens to turn on relatively later in the exponential because it's hard.
What is your long-term vision for where Anthropic is heading, both as a company but also in terms of its impact to the world?
Yeah, in terms of as a company on the commercial side, I think in terms of knowledge work and the knowledge economy. When I think about all the enterprise customers in the world, on the, there's both the internal side and there's the external side. On the internal side, I think about what I think people might really want from these models is for them to act as coworkers, someone I can work with and who knows a lot about the particular company and is able to take actions within the company using all of its systems. So today's models are if not deployed carefully, a bit like saying, I'll take some random smart person from off the street who doesn't know anything about my company and I'll ask it questions and it can answer them. I would really love for us to go to the world where we can connect to databases, we can connect to data that's stored. And again, some of this connects to cloud where it's like, okay, you're running the model on say GCP. All the data may also be on GCP. So can we put this in kind of a single security boundary and make it a single integrated system? But I think the broader vision is, how can we turn these LLMs into something that looks more like coworkers and has context? And the context doesn't need to be added in these relatively janky ways. In terms of impact on the world, what I think about is a theme that's come up over and over again here and comes up in the field general is just progress is really fast, right? This fast exponential, I think that is the most salient fact about the field overall. And with this fast exponential comes many benefits, also comes risks. We've dealt with many risks before as a society. I think the only thing that's really different here is how fast they're coming at us, and therefore how many of them there are. Things that would be drawn out over a century are happening in 5 or 10 years. And so, I would love for Anthropic to set examples here. We've set an example with our responsible scaling plan with, saying we're going to measure for these risks at every new generation of models. And after we've released this, the other major companies, close to all of them now, I think, have followed suit with similar frameworks. And so trying to help think about how we can set an example and how everyone in the industry can work together. Forget about this company winning or that company winning. Can we all work together to address these problems and mitigate the risks of the technology so that we can all share in the benefits?
That's fantastic. I think that's a great place to stop. So thank you so much for the conversation today.
Thank you for having me.